Have me tonight. All of me.
Say that again.
She didn't plan to say it. She didn't plan any of it. Not the dress, not the heels, not the way she walked into that party like the room owed her something and she was there to collect. But there she was, Amara, heart hammering so loud she could barely hear the music, body pressed against the most dangerous man in Seoul. His hands, those hands that hadn't touched a woman in 3 years, gripping her hips like he'd already forgotten how to let go. And the words had already left her lips.
Have me tonight.
Have me tonight, all of me. The silence after those words lasted exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds where Kang Min-joon went completely, terrifyingly, beautifully still. And then he turned his head slowly toward her ear and said 2 words in a voice so low, it rewired something fundamental in her chest. Say that again. Hey, welcome back, or welcome for the very first time. I am so glad you're here today because this story, it's not just about a woman falling for a dangerous man. It's about a woman who spent years making herself small for her family, for the world, for a man who looked right through her, and then one night decided she was done. Done being overlooked, done being the one people look through instead of at, done shrinking herself into a shape that made everyone else comfortable while she quietly disappeared inside it. And the moment she stopped shrinking, the most powerful man in the room couldn't look away. Hit that subscribe button right now and tap the notification bell. We drop new stories every week and you do not want to miss what's coming. And drop a comment below. Have you ever had a moment where you just decided enough? Where you stopped waiting to be chosen and chose yourself instead? Tell me. I read every single one. Okay, let's go. You need to understand Amara before tonight. You need to know who she was so you can fully appreciate who she's about to become. Amara Osei, 26, had spent the better part of her life being the wrong one. Not wrong in a loud, dramatic way. Nobody was ever cruel. Nobody sat her down and said you're not the favorite. It was quieter than that, more surgical. It was the way her mother's face rearranged itself differently when her sister walked into a room. The way conversations naturally orbited Adiz, beautiful, easy-to-love Adiz, while Amara stood at the edge of gatherings, holding a drink she didn't want, nodding along to conversations she hadn't been invited into. She was plus-sized in a family that valued smallness, deep and quiet in a world that rewarded loud and sparkly. She had this laugh, full-bodied, uninhibited, the kind that took up space, and she'd learned, over years of small corrections, to swallow it, to give it in smaller doses, to not be too much. She worked as a financial analyst for Park Holdings, one of Seoul's most prestigious investment firms. She was exceptional at her job. She knew this. Her numbers were clean, her instincts sharp, her presentations so thorough that senior partners had started forwarding her work upward without changing a word. And yes, she knew who owned Park Holdings. She'd known for exactly 2 years who sat at the very top of that food chain. Kang Min-joon. Now, before we go further, let me explain something about Min-joon, because he is not your typical story villain. He doesn't throw his power around. He's not loud. He's not cruel. He's the kind of dangerous that wears a pressed suit and says good evening with perfect courtesy and still makes you feel, somehow, like you're standing at the edge of something with no railing. He ran one of the most feared organizations in Korea, the Kang Network, with the cold precision of a man who had decided long ago that emotion was a variable to be controlled, not expressed. His legitimate enterprises funded hospitals, arts programs, university scholarships. His illegitimate ones, nobody discussed those out loud, not twice. And Amara had been in love with him for exactly 730 days. She knew the precise moment it started, a rainy Wednesday conference room on the 32nd floor. She'd been mid-presentation when Min-joon walked in unannounced, stood in the doorway. The room shifted, the way rooms shift when certain people enter them. She'd faltered. He'd given her one small nod, continue, and taken a seat at the back. She'd finished the presentation. He'd left without a word. And somehow, in the space of that 1 hour, she'd fallen completely and catastrophically in love with a man who, When they passed each other in the halls of Park Holdings, gave her a polite smile and looked right through her. Not unkindly. Just distantly. Like she was furniture he'd already catalogued and filed away. Here's the thing about being invisible to someone you love. It's not like being hated. Hate at least acknowledges your existence. Being invisible is its own particular ache, the kind that sits behind your sternum and radiates quietly outward at the most inconvenient moments. During Sunday brunches, late nights when the apartment's too quiet, during company events where she'd watch Min-joon move through a crowd like water, effortless, contained, untouchable, and think, he will never see me. Not because she wasn't worthy, but because he simply wasn't looking. Until the night of the Han River Gala. Until the night, Amara decided that invisible was a choice. And she was done choosing it. The Han River Gala was, on its surface, a charity event. A who's who of Seoul's financial elite gathered in the grandeur ballroom of the Seiwa Hotel, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, chandeliers dripping with crystal, the particular atmosphere that happens when money decides to dress up as culture. Amara had attended every year. Every year, she'd worn something dark and tasteful and deliberately unnoticeable. Something that said, I'm here professionally, please don't look at me. Something designed, whether she'd admitted it or not, to disappear. This year, everything changed. It started 3 weeks earlier, late on a night when she was scrolling old photos and stopped on one of herself at 22. Beach, shorts and a crop top, laughing at something off camera, completely unguarded, completely herself. She stared at that photo for a long time. She looked alive in it. When had she stopped looking alive? She called her best friend Yemi. I need to stop being invisible, she said. Yemi's response was immediate and completely unambiguous. Finally, what are you wearing to the gala? 3 weeks and one mildly terrifying fitting room experience later, Amara had a dress. Not a gown, a dress. Specifically, a deep emerald bodycon mini that hit mid-thigh, long sleeves, a neckline that was technically modest and somehow still managed to celebrate every curve she'd spent years apologizing for. Her natural hair was out, full, coiled, voluminous. Her makeup was bold, winged liner, deep berry lip. Highlighter on her cheekbones that caught light like she'd been designed by someone who understood what light was for. She stood in front of her mirror an hour before the gala and barely recognized herself. Not because she looked different, because she looked like herself, fully, finally, without the apology she'd been attaching to her own reflection for years. She walked into the grandeur ballroom at 8:47 p.m. And something shifted. Not in the room, in her. She greeted colleagues. She laughed freely, her full laugh, the one that took up space, the one she'd been rationing for years. She took champagne from a passing tray and sipped it and looked out at souls spread below her and thought, with a clarity that was almost shocking. I belong here. Not I've earned the right to be here. I belong here, present tense, right now as I am. She was 40 minutes in, mid-conversation with a junior partner, when she felt it. That specific electric sensation of being watched. Not a glance, something heavier. Something with density and intention. She felt it the way you feel a shift in pressure before weather changes. She turned, casually, like she was simply looking around the room, and found Min-joon's eyes already on her. He was seated at one of the private tables near the back, the kind of position that gave a clear view of the entire room while keeping its occupant partially in shadow. Standard Min-joon. She'd noticed his preference over 2 years. He always chose maximum visibility for himself, minimum exposure to others. He was with 2 of his men, some quiet conversation happening at the table. But his eyes were not at his table. His eyes were on her. And it was not the polite, furniture-cataloging acknowledgement she'd grown accustomed to. It was different. She couldn't name it from across the room. But she felt it land, warm and focused, the way sunlight feels when it comes through a magnifying glass and you realize a second too late that it's concentrated. She held his gaze. He didn't look away. She turned back to her conversation, heart doing something complicated, champagne suddenly tasting different. And then she didn't decide it consciously, not exactly. She started walking toward him. What would you do in that moment? Drop it in the comments. Do you look away, get another drink and pretend it didn't happen? Or do you walk straight toward the thing you've wanted for 2 years? Because Amara Osei, in this dress, on this night, with 3 weeks of I am done being invisible sitting solid in her chest. She walked. She didn't plan the next part either. Her feet understood something her brain was still processing. Like she'd been waiting 2 years for permission and had finally decided to grant it to herself. She excused herself from the conversation, took one breath, and crossed the room. Min-joon watched her the entire way. She felt every step of it. Here's what she didn't know she was watching, what was happening in him as she moved toward him. For 3 years, Min-joon had been broken in a way he'd never fully explained to anyone. Something had happened, an incident he kept locked in a room in himself that had no windows, that had quietly, surgically dismantled his capacity for closeness. His therapist called it a psychological block. He called it being smart. He'd built walls so comprehensive, so well-maintained, that most people didn't even know they existed. They just knew he was alone. They just knew he never left events with anyone, never brought anyone to events, deflected every advance with a courtesy so smooth the rejection felt almost like a compliment. For 3 years, not one woman had sparked a single flicker. And then Amara Osei walked across a room in an emerald dress with her natural hair out and her full laugh and those heels and something in Min-joon's chest, something he had declared dead and buried and done with, opened one eye. His men noticed her approaching and moved to rise. He stopped them with 2 fingers barely lifted from the table. She was 3 steps away. And then she did something he wasn't expecting. Her heel turned, just slightly, just enough, and she pitched forward directly into his lap. Time went granular. Every detail arriving separately, the fabric of his suit jacket under her palms. The sharp, controlled exhale from him, not a gasp, more like a word he'd decided not to say. The warmth of him, solid and real, underneath her. She should have scrambled up immediately. She didn't. Instead, she leaned in, close to his ear, cedar and something darker in his cologne, the slight tension in his jaw, the rigid stillness of a man exerting enormous, visible control over his own body. And she said it. Quietly, steadily, like she'd been building toward this for 2 years. Have me tonight, all of me.
All of me.
The silence that followed was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. Min-joon did not move. His breathing did not change. For 3 seconds, Kang Min-joon was completely still. And in those 3 seconds, every terrible regret Amara had ever had about every brave thing she'd never done compressed into a single white-hot point of what have I done. And then his hands found her hips. Not gently, not tentatively. His hands found her hips the way anchors find ocean floors. With a finality, a "this is where I am meant to be" certainty that was deeply, unfairly devastating to her cardiovascular system. His grip tightened. And very slowly, Min-joon turned his head until his lips were almost, at her temple. Say that again. 2 words, gravel and silk. The voice of a man who was completely in control and completely pretending he still was. Amara's confidence wavered. She steadied it. Have me, she said. Tonight, all of me. A breath. Then the truest thing she'd ever said out loud. I'm tired of being invisible to you. His grip on her hips tightened fractionally. You work for me, he said, low, measured, like a man reading from a script his hands had already decided to ignore. I work for Park Holdings. You own Park Holdings. That's 2 degrees of separation, and I'm willing to argue neither one is disqualifying. Something moved in his jaw, not quite a smile, the ghost of one, the memory of one. You've been drinking, he said. Half a glass of champagne. I'm not drunk, Min-joon, I'm decided. The sound of his name in her mouth, not Mr. Kang, not sir, just Min-joon, shifted the atmosphere between them like a door opening in a room that had been sealed. His hands moved, fractionally. the internal argument visible in the hesitation. They didn't move away. "This isn't a good idea," he said. "I know. I'm not an easy person. I've worked adjacent to you for 2 years. I'm not under any illusions about easy." "Then why?" And here's the thing about Amara Osei, the thing Min-joon was discovering in real time. Sitting in a ballroom with his hands on her hips and his entire carefully constructed wall developing visible cracks, she was honest. Completely, almost dangerously honest. It was what made her exceptional at her job. It was what she'd been afraid to bring to her personal life because honesty requires exposure, and exposure requires believing you're worth the risk of being seen. She decided tonight she was. "Because," she said, "I've spent 2 years watching you look through me, and I spent 3 weeks deciding I was going to walk into this room and be impossible to ignore." She met his eyes. No performance, no strategy. "I want you. I've wanted you for 2 years, and tonight I decided that was worth saying even if you don't want me back, because at least I'll know I said it." The silence after that was different from the first one. The first silence was stunned. This one was something interior and still, the kind that happens when something that has been closed for a very long time begins, slowly, to open. He looked at her, really looked. Not the distance-managing scan she was used to, something close and careful and almost pained. "It's not that I didn't see you," he said finally. "It's that I saw you too clearly." Amara blinked. "I don't know what that means." "It means you are not the kind of woman a man picks up and puts down. And I was not in a position to be the kind of man who doesn't." She held that. "And now?" she asked. His hands shifted from her hips to the armrests of his chair. Not withdrawing, stabilizing, like a man trying to find solid ground. "Now," he said, "I'd like to have dinner with you." Amara stared at him. "I just offered you." "I know what you offered." The ghost of that smile again, more complete this time. "I'm asking for dinner tomorrow, 7 o'clock. That's not Amara. First time he'd said her name. In 2 years, the first time she'd heard it in that voice, and it landed, God help her, like a key finding a lock it was made for. 7 o'clock, he repeated. "If after dinner you still want to make reckless decisions, I'll be in a considerably better position to." "Yes," she said before the sentence finished. "Fine, dinner, yes." The smile completed itself. Small, controlled, completely devastating. "Good," he said. "You should probably get off my lap now before I change my mind about the dinner part." If this story is hitting different, smash that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. Okay, back to Min-joon's composure quietly dissolving. She floated through the rest of the gala. That is not an exaggeration. She genuinely could not feel her feet. She found Yemi near the bar, grabbed her arm, pulled her into the nearest quiet corner, and reported everything in a voice pitched 3 octaves above her normal register. Yemi grabbed both of Amara's arms with both hands. He smiled. It was small. "He smiled at you and said your name and asked you to dinner." Yemi was vibrating slightly. "Amara, that man has not smiled at a single living human being at any company event in 2 years. I've been watching. I have a note in my phone." "You have a note?" "I keep records on important things. Focus. He asked you to dinner." "He asked me to dinner." "You put on a good dress, decided you were done making yourself small, and manifested a whole emotionally unavailable mafia boss into pursuing you." A pause. "When you say it like that," Amara said, "it sounds almost simple." "It is almost simple," Yemi said, with the absolute conviction of someone who'd watched her best friend disappear herself for years. "That's the part that should make you furious and free at the same time. You were always this person, Amara. You just kept her in a box." Her phone buzzed the next morning at 9. Unknown number. "Tomorrow is confirmed. Car at 6:45. K." She put her phone face down on the counter. Picked it up. Read it 4 more times. Then she got dressed, went to work, and spent the entire day being completely useless at her job. which, for a woman whose numbers were always clean, was its own kind of evidence that something fundamental had shifted. The car arrived at 6:43. The restaurant had no signage and didn't take reservations from people it hadn't already vetted. It occupied the 47th floor of a building that understood exactly what it was, and the view of Seoul from their window made the city look manageable, all that sprawling light contained, and beautiful and small. Min-joon was already there when she arrived. He stood when she entered. She'd seen him in suits 100 times. This suit was different in a way she couldn't immediately name, and then she realized he looked slightly less armored. Same impeccable fit, same quiet authority, but the collar was open by exactly one button, and there was something in his posture that said, "I chose to be here rather than I am performing presence." His expression when he saw her was careful, the way a person looks at something they want badly enough to be afraid of breaking. "You came," he said. "I said I would. People say things." "I mean things," she said. "Some people find it exhausting." "I don't," he said. They sat. They were 20 minutes into dinner. Good conversation, real conversation, the kind that doesn't happen between people who are performing for each other, when a man stopped at their table. He hadn't been invited to stop. He simply appeared, the way certain men appear in certain circles, quietly, with an authority that didn't announce itself because it didn't need to. He looked at Min-joon first. Then his eyes moved to Amara. They stayed there for 3 seconds, not rude, not threatening, just assessing, before he gave Min-joon a single small nod and walked away without a word. The temperature at their table changed. Min-joon's posture, which had been the most open she'd ever seen it, closed by a degree that was subtle and complete. His hand, which had been resting near his wine glass, moved to his lap. He recovered in under 30 seconds, smoothly, practiced. But Amara had seen it. "Who was that?" she asked. "Someone who notices things," Min-joon said. "Should I be concerned?" He looked at her directly, and what she saw in his eyes in that moment was something she'd file away and return to later, a conflict between what he wanted to say and what he'd decided to say instead. "Not tonight," he said, which was not the same as no. She let it go, for now. The conversation resumed. The food was extraordinary. The wine was the kind that tasted like someone had spent years thinking about it. And somewhere around the second course, Min-joon set down his fork and looked at his glass with the expression of a man choosing load-bearing words. "I haven't been available," he said, "to anyone for a while." Amara set her fork down. "Available how?" "In any way that matters." She looked at him, the careful man, the controlled man, the man who had gone rigid at the briefest contact last night, and asked her to say it again in a voice that sounded less like desire and more like someone surfacing from deep water. Desperate, relieved, disoriented by air. "What happened?" she asked. He shook his head, not dismissive, more like not yet. Like there was a door, but it needed a different key than the one she currently held. "Something that made me believe the people closest to me were better kept at a distance." "How long?" "A beat. 3 years." She absorbed that quietly. 3 years of keeping everyone out. 3 years of polite distance and controlled smiles and being in every room while remaining unreachable inside all of them. "And yet," she said, "here you are. Here I am. Having dinner. Having dinner. With me." His eyes met hers, steady, unguarded in a way she suspected was rare and possibly unprecedented in a restaurant setting. "It's not that I didn't see you," he said again, echoing last night, but softer this time, explanatory rather than confessional. "For 2 years, I've seen exactly who you are. I watched you present in that conference room and I thought, this one is different. This one doesn't perform. And I told myself that was exactly why I needed to keep my distance." "Because you knew you couldn't pick me up and put me down," she said. "Because I knew if I stopped keeping my distance, I wouldn't be able to." Amara felt that sentence land somewhere deep. "And last night," he said, You stopped giving me the option. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't the grand gesture. Sometimes it's just deciding to stop waiting for permission to be fully yourself. Amara didn't become someone new that night. She didn't transform into someone bolder or better or more deserving of love. She just stopped apologizing for the person she already was, and in doing so, she became impossible for the right person to ignore. Remember that. They stayed until the staff began diplomatically resetting tables around them. Neither of them noticed until a server materialized with a third round of water. The universal, extremely polite signal for "we love you, please go home." They looked at each other. They laughed. Min-joon's laugh was brief and low and slightly rusty, like something retrieved from a drawer it hadn't been opened in a long time. It was, objectively, a lot to experience at close range. Amara made a note to be less affected by it and immediately failed. Outside, Seoul's November air had made a unilateral decision to be merciless. The car was waiting at the curb. They stood on the sidewalk and Min-joon did something she hadn't anticipated. He didn't ask. He simply stepped forward and settled his jacket around her shoulders, adjusting the lapels, his hands close to her face, his eyes doing that careful, afraid thing she'd come to recognize as his version of wanting something badly enough to be gentle with it. "The car will take you home," he said. "And you. I'll manage." "Min-joon." He stilled. "Last night I said something bold," she said, "and you asked for dinner instead, and I said yes." She looked up at him. "Dinner was extraordinary, and I need you to understand something." She held his gaze. "I'm not in a hurry. Whatever available means or doesn't mean, I'm not asking for everything. I never really was." "Then what were you asking for?" "To be seen," she said simply. "That's all I've ever wanted from anyone." Something in his face shifted. Not broke, opened. The way a window opens, slowly, into a room that hasn't had air in a long time. "You've been seen," he said quietly, "for longer than you know." She absorbed that. "Then maybe," she said, "you should tell me about it sometime." "Maybe I should," he said. She got in the car, warm in his jacket. She watched him through the window as it pulled away, standing on the sidewalk in the cold, jacketless, watching her leave, still as everything else moved around him. And Amara Osei, who had spent 2 years invisible and 3 weeks deciding she was done, leaned her head back against the seat and felt, for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, completely and entirely herself. Not performing, not shrinking, not waiting for someone else's eyes to confirm she existed. She existed, fully, right now. And the most controlled man in Seoul was standing in the cold watching her car disappear, because he couldn't bring himself to go inside until he couldn't see it anymore. That was enough. For now, that was everything. We talk a lot about love stories like there, about finding the right person. But Amara's story was never really about Min-joon. It was about the moment she stopped making herself small enough to fit through other people's narrow definitions of who she was allowed to be. The moment she wore the dress, said the thing, crossed the room. Min-joon was the mirror. She was always the story. And you have a dress somewhere. Metaphorically or literally, you have a room you've been standing at the edge of. You have something you've been waiting to say to someone or to yourself. Amara didn't wait until she was ready. She decided. "There's a difference. Okay, I need to hear from you. Drop in the comments. What's your version of crossing the room? What's the thing you've been standing at the edge of in your career, your relationships, your own self-image, that you know you need to walk toward?" I'm asking for real. The comments on this channel are genuinely one of my favorite places on the internet, and I want to hear your story. If this one resonated, and I genuinely hope it did, please share it with someone who needs it today. Not someone who needs a love story. Someone who needs the reminder that visibility starts with yourself. Like this video, if Amara made you want to put on your dress. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next story. Hit the notification bell if missing one feels like a genuine loss. I see you, every single one of you. And I'll see you in the next one.